Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin Quibell, known to my friends as Marv, and this time I am speaking with Jeff Cummings from the show The Best Song Podcast. Hey Jeff, thanks for speaking with me today.
Marv, it's a pleasure. I'm so appreciative that you sent out the invite.
I'm looking forward to it. What's better than a good song from a film?
There really isn't much that's better than a good song from a film, because what you get is that lasting impression that you can take from the theater. Sometimes you could take a great line from the movie long after you've seen it, but sometimes you hear a song and it just sticks with you. And there's nothing better that helps you bring back the memories of a great film than a great song.
No, and it fits me perfectly because my favorite film of all time is, and I've said this to plenty of people, Singing in the Rain.
Oh, yes. Very good songs in there. However, no original songs in that one.
No, as I've noticed.
But the songs that were in there, Romden and Green wrote, were just absolutely astounding. And of course, the title song with all that dancing that is iconic to this day. You can't beat anything from that film.
No,
It's very hard.
And dancing like that when he had the flu.
I heard that too. I never got that really verified, but when the best dancers, that when they're not feeling their best, sometimes you just put the music on and there they go. Can't stop them.
No matter how I feel, I've still got to have a dance with my other half every now and again. Usually irritatingly when she's doing something in the kitchen.
But then that's showing that you're in your good spirits. And I can see why Singing in the Rain is one of your best. You put Gene Kelly in a musical and you're never going to be disappointed.
No, although disappointed to find out that Debbie Reynolds isn't singing all of the songs that she's pretending to.
Yes, but I think that's the whole kind of hook of the movie anyway.
Yeah. That's the funny thing, is that she's pretending to be the voice of Gene Hagen.
Yeah. And the irony is
that she's not the real voice either.
Yeah. Yeah. She actually sang a song that was nominated for an Oscar called Tammy. And yeah, that's not her singing.
Wow. It's Villy Manilli all over again.
Yeah. Not that bad. She wasn't disgraced ever.
No.
But it's just one of those things but that was the history of actors at the time. They weren't really, most of them weren't established singers. And the bad part of it is the people that dubbed them never got credit.
That's true. Yeah. We find that in all sorts of films, not just musicals. We're already going on to tangents here. But James Bond, for instance, a lot of the female characters in James Bond have got somebody else doing the voices. And even some of the male characters, because Goldfinger, that's not actually his voice, that's somebody else doing a voiceover.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
Or so I've heard anyway, but because his English wasn't very good. So what's your first memory of music in a film, specifically a film that you saw and you thought, God, that's a good song?
It's not real. Okay, so my earliest memory of really being attached to movie music isn't attached to a song.
Okay.
It's just attached to music, but it still will have the same kind of impact. So it was 1993, and I, like everybody else in the world, went to go see Jurassic Park. I wanted to see the dinosaurs. That's why I bought the ticket. And the movie was great for the first 10, 15 minutes. I was really into it. I knew that I was waiting to see the dinosaurs. They were setting it up well. And then as they're traveling to the island on the helicopter and they're having this repartee that's kind of cool. And then John Hammond says, "There it is." And then we see the shot of the helicopter and it pans and you see the island and there's this great brass fanfare by John Williams.
Yeah.
And I was let's see, 1993. I was 19 years old at the time. So I was an adult. I had seen lots of movies. Star Wars films were my favorites. I knew what movie music was, but that just was like, what is going on here? That music is making me feel something.
Yeah.
And it just really affected me. And then the music, when the dinosaurs showed up, I was already in awe and I was already like, this is fantastic. But the music for that, I got chills and I was just like, I've got to know more about this guy.
Mm.
And the end credits said music by John Williams. And silly me did not know who John Williams was. And then I did my research and was like, he's written music for all my favorite movies. And that kind of started me on a trek to be a John Williams fan and started me on a trek to just know more about movie music. And it kind of went into songs as well, because they have the same effects that scores do. And I'll say that a song that really affected me, even though I'd seen the movie a lot, but it didn't really affect me until much, much, much later, was Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
And I think as an adult, when I was thinking about my adult life and what I wanted to do, and I was dreaming of that life that I knew could be out there.
Yeah.
I guess Over the Rainbow, and the way Judy Garland sang it, was like, somewhere way out in the distance is this magical place where I'm going to be able to live the kind of life I want to live and achieve the dreams I want. And I think I was about 20, almost 25 at the time. And I just sat down. It was on TV, Marv.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
on TV all the time. And I was just like, sure, I'll watch The Wizard of Oz. But it just really affected me. And I was like, I know this song. Why? I know what it means, but it's just meant something different at the time. It was just the place I was at the time. And every time I hear it now, it takes me back to that moment where I was thinking about what I wanted my life to be like, and what that song meant in that point in my life. And I've achieved a lot of great things in my life, and I've done some things. And I would say now I'm at that place over the rainbow, that kind of where dreams come true. And so I think back about maybe that song helped propel me to this point in my life.
That's a perfect example of what I was sort of like trying to get from you in essence, is because with that song, you can miss, it's like a lot of songs, you can miss the meaning behind them. And that song, particularly Somewhere Over the Rainbow, it's a hopeful song, because if you look into it, and you're right, it's one of those films, and that song particularly is one of those songs as well, but it's one of those films where you miss something, you miss bits here and there, and it's done in the black and white bit before she goes over to before she goes to Oz, and you might miss the fact that she's living with her aunt and uncle, and they're not in the best, shall we say, economic life. You can tell that from how they're living. And it's almost like this person is sort of like saying somewhere it's possible, or some possibility that this life that I've got now, there's more there if we reach for it. And it's like a hope there. And that's what the song's all about. But it's one of those cases where it tells you everything in that song that you need to know, and you don't need dialogue, you don't need to lead up to it or anything. It tells you everything in that song. And that's how, when you have these things like musicals, that's when it works perfectly, because the song says everything it needs to without a build and an explanation as to, oh, this is this is this, and then they're going to go into more explanatory in the song. You don't need any of that. That's when it works.
Yeah, that's what Over the Rainbow did. I think it's played in like the first 5 minutes of the
Yeah.
movie had gone by, and then the song plays. So you don't really know anything about Dorothy until she sings it, and then you're like, okay, I'm with you. And yeah, that's one of the great things about that song. I think that it's resonated with so many people is you can attach. It could have been written outside of the movie, and it would have meant it's probably would still be very, very well loved in the 21st century.
Yeah. Going back to that favorite film of mine with Singing in the Rain, when you got the three of them and they sing good morning, that even though it wasn't written for the film, that says everything it needs to about the fact that they've been talking all night, they've got a friendship there, and there's this relationship, and that song says it all. Basically, it's like one of those, it explains like when you've been in a situation yourself with friends and you've talked and talked and talked, and then you look at the time and you think, wow, where has all the time gone? It's the same with that one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's actually one of my favorite songs in the film because it kind of turns it's a moment where the film itself and the characters turn a corner,
Yeah.
and the song just really highlights that, and they're joyful because that relationship has turned a corner. And more than Singing in the Rain where he realizes that he's in love with Debbie Reynolds, it's
Yeah.
this song is about the friendship that carried all the way through.
Yeah. Between the three main characters, the trifecta. Yeah.
Yep.
So what is your history with podcasts?
I never really put much thought into them before I started my own. I knew they were out there, but I always thought, and I actually had heard a couple of them, and they were just talk shows and people just interviewing people. And it's not that I don't like talk shows, but sometimes it's not very interesting. Or, I'm
Yeah.
going to be very shallow here. I watch a talk show on TV because of what somebody that is pretty, and I want to look at them.
Yeah.
I don't really care what they're saying. They're good looking people on TV, and I want to look at them. So if someone who is on a TV talk show does a podcast interview, I'm like, eh, okay, maybe. Sometimes they're promoting their movie, and sometimes they're actually, you can learn a little bit about themselves. But
Yeah.
I never thought it was a very interesting format, and so I never thought much about them. And then a couple of podcasts had come along. One was Cinematic Sound Radio, which is actually a collection of podcasts about movie music, and that was right up my alley. And that was kind of the format that I liked. And so I started to listen to pieces of it here and there. And that was right about 2015 or so, somewhere in that time. And but I was never like, oh, I could do something like that too. It was just, that's interesting. They're doing it well, and they're presenting something that I probably wouldn't otherwise. They're presenting some information I wouldn't otherwise know. And I never put any thought into maybe I should do my own. I just like the fact that people could do it. I like the fact that people had the opportunity to do a show. It's kind of like YouTube was for video, podcasts were for audio. And I liked that there was that outlet, but it took me a long time to realize it was something I even wanted to even dip half a toe into.
Before we miss this chance, a message to anybody listening. If somebody needs to very quickly get in touch with Mr. Williams, John Williams, and do a podcast interviewing him and go through his career.
That was my first show. And I
Okay.
could not believe that that was something I was going to do. So I actually, so the history is the show that I'm working on now, the Best Song Podcast, was
Yep.
actually my first idea. I said, I was just sitting, I can't even remember I think it was Shaft. I was sitting there watching Shaft on TV. I hadn't seen it
Yep.
probably in 20 years. And I watched it, and of course the song comes up in the beginning, and I was like, "Gosh, this is so amazing!" And I had to look it up, and because I couldn't remember the year it came out, I said 1971. This is probably very groundbreaking for 1971.
Mm.
And I just got inquisitive about it, and so I started to research more about Isaac Hayes, and I started to research more about the Shaft series, and I started to research more about how the song was criticized, and what did it win any other awards besides the Academy Award. And I got into this rabbit hole about this one song,
Yep.
and I went further back into the history of movie songs, and yeah, I realized theme from Shaft was very revolutionary for the time. And I started to think I learned a lot from just that one song. And I kind of wish there was somewhere out there that was just all collected about all the Oscar nominated songs.
Yep.
And of course there isn't, because it would be a volume it would be multiple volumes. One as I have found out, 1 year alone could be a book in itself. And so I just said, maybe somebody could do this. Maybe I'll reach out to somebody and say, hey, you should do this. And then after I thought about it, I said, why don't I do this? And so I started to think about what would that entail. And so I started to think about the time it would take to do all the research, to do the recording and the editing, not knowing anything about podcast production. And I just thought, if I'm going to do it by myself, it's basically going to take up a lot of my life because I have a full-time job and all that. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I have the time or the capability or the finances to be able to handle this. And so I just put it away. I just said, nope, I'm not going to do it. It was just a fun thought. And then about 6 months later, was watching an old John Williams movie called Penelope. He did the
Yeah.
score for it. And I just sat there thinking, this is a very beautiful movie. I really like it. And the score is wonderful. And I want to know more about this score because it's John Williams doing an out and out comedy. And he doesn't do that a lot in his later career. And I found out he did lots of comedies in the 60s. And wow, that's very interesting. And why hasn't anybody written a biography of John Williams? He probably doesn't want to participate in that kind of thing. And it would be volumes upon volumes upon volumes of books because you can't, how can you encapsulate his life in just maybe a 300-page book?
Yeah.
And so I said, this is kind of like the one I wanted to do about the Oscar songs, but it seems a little bit more feasible that I could do it. Because with the Oscar songs, I have to watch about 400 movies. I have to watch the movies where all these songs are contained. With
Wow.
John Williams, it was only about 105 movies at the time. So I said, okay, I could do that. And knowing that I wasn't going to do it live, what I told myself is I'm going to write the scripts for the first 15 episodes and see how long it takes me to do those, just to write the script, not record or anything. And each script, from the time I started watching the movie to doing research to writing and editing the script down, because sometimes I'd write 13 pages and I wanted to try to whittle it down to 10, it took about a week. And so I said, I can handle that. But
Yep.
not just, that's not the only thing I did, but it from start to finish with maybe an hour or two here and there each day, it took me about a week. And I said, okay, I could do this. So 14 weeks later, I did 15 scripts and I said, okay, let's start recording and editing and see how long that takes. So I went and recorded the first 10 episodes and those were easy. It was great that it wasn't live because I messed up a lot, but I had a lot of fun doing it. And I realized I could do this. And so I said, I'm 10 episodes into this one. Maybe I'll do this show first. And then when I'm done with this one, because I knew it was going to end, because John, once I get to the end of his filmography, that would be the end. And I said, I'll stop there and then maybe I'll get back to this Oscar songs thing if I have the energy. So I started doing the writing and researching for that in July of 2018 and started recording in August 2018. And the first show went out in January 2019, January 1st, the first Monday of January 2019. And each episode came out every Monday. So it was an episode every week. But I was 15 to 20 episodes ahead. So I didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I've got to rush to get this done. If there was a week where I was so busy I couldn't get anything done, that's okay, because I'm now 14 weeks ahead. But I kept going because I was excited about the next film. If it was a film I hadn't seen, I can't wait to see this film and hear this score. Or if it was a score that I knew very well, I didn't have to watch the film because I could just write it because I knew the score by heart. The Star Wars movies, Jaws, E.T., Fiddler on the Roof, a lot of these others, The Reavers, all those scores I knew by heart.
Yeah.
And
Superman.
and so I just had to maybe reference them. I couldn't remember what scene this particular music was in, so I'd have to reference that. But those were easy because that just took a few days to write. And so that was the big thing. I always tried to stay 10 episodes ahead, so I was never felt like I was rushing through it. I could take my time and just devote myself to the scripts and not feel rushed. And so my last episode went out end of 2020. And I said I was done. No more. That was tiring. It was exhausting, really.
Yeah.
It was exhausting. I was having fun, but it was very exhausting. And so I just said no more. And then the bug hit me. I said, and it was actually watching the Academy Awards in 2021. And I said, yeah, I got to do this podcast. It's going to be fun. I would love to know more. And so I just, a couple months later, I just started picking it up. And like I said, just got really far ahead, did about 15 episodes up until about October 2021. And then January of 2022, no, January, sorry, I'm going to rewind. I started this in March of 2022. And then in
Yeah.
August, and by August, September of 2022, I had 15 episodes done. And in January of 2023, I published the first one. And again, published them every
Wow.
week. So each week is a different year. And yes, it's a lot of this one took longer because I have to, let's say back in the early days, some years they had 10, 12 songs nominated. So I had to, and they were movies I'd never seen before, probably never even heard of. So I had to watch those movies, and I had to watch them, probably not watch the whole movie twice, but I had to watch the movie, hear the song, and then maybe watch the scene again with the song so I get some better understanding. I had to do the research. Sometimes it's about a songwriter that I'd never heard of, and I had to really dig deep to find it. But it was just so much fun, and I actually was having just as much fun. And yes, it was exhausting because I'd have to watch 12 movies, and some of them weren't very good. But I was just having so much fun, and I found that the process was easier to manage because I had done it before. And I think as much as I really liked the work I did on the John Williams podcast, it really informed me about how to manage my work for the Best Song podcast. And so when I get to a new year, I'm like, I know exactly what to do. It's almost like clockwork. It's not like I'm just kind of doing it not without thinking, but I just know each step by heart and it just flows.
Wow. 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 It's interesting because you go into it, and I've listened to episodes, and then because what was the one you were speaking about one year, and you mentioned the title, and I thought, wow, I cannot believe that song, even though it was in a film that year, was not nominated for an Oscar. And the one that really jumped out at me was the one that's used, funnily enough and ironically, for the Oscars and all over the place in Hollywood, which is Hooray for Hollywood.
Oh yeah, yeah. Johnny Mercer, one of his early songs. Yeah.
But
Yeah, I couldn't believe it
yeah,
either. I never knew that. And then and I think that was one of the reasons why I didn't want to just highlight the songs that were nominated for an Oscar. I wanted you to know about the songs that weren't nominated too. And it made me think that's a shame, or well, too bad, but look, the song is more, and Hooray for Hollywood's probably more popular than all the songs that were nominated that year.
yeah,
It definitely had a longer life.
absolutely. So you've done show history podcast. So the research is basically you'll you watch all of the films, but then you get context, don't you? Then in that case, because you'll watch the film and then the sequence, in fact, in some cases, sequences. In the case of Que Sera, Sera, because it's
Yes.
in the film more than once, but you get the context of where the song fits into the film as well.
Oh, yes. If I didn't watch the movie, I would just say, "Oh, yeah, Que Sera, Sera is a great film, and it was written by Jay Evans and Ray Livingston, and they had history, and they were great songwriters, and yada yada yada, and let's move on." But it definitely has it had an impact, and it was a great song in the movie because it was this song that was attached to the mother and son, and it's very important later when the mother is trying to find the kidnapped son, and she sings Que Sera, Sera, and he knows it's his mother because it's their song. And it takes on a whole new meaning. And I think that's obviously the essence of what a good movie song is. It has meaning. It's not just, oh, these two guys wrote a song and they just put it in the movie and there it is. Without You can't take Que Sera, Sera out of The Man Who Knew Too Much. The movie
No.
you wouldn't have a movie. So that was definitely one reason why I had to watch the movies. And I'll tell you, the research, it's fun, but I'll tell you this really quickly. I went to university for journalism,
Yep.
and I spent a lot of my years as a full-time journalist, and I still do some freelance writing, but that taught me a lot about research and how important research is. You want to, if you're going to do a profile on somebody, if you're going to, before you interview them, you got to know really who they are. You don't want to just have them tell you their whole story, so you can get deeper into their questions. And so I learned a lot about research. And so usually the first step is to watch the film. And then the second step is, do I want to know more about the song itself or the songwriters? Usually, if I've never heard of the songwriters before, then I'll start to research the songwriters and find out who they are. Wikipedia is often the first place I go. And then usually Wikipedia will have links to outside articles where they take this information from. And those articles will usually have other nuggets of information I want to take, and they just lead me down a rabbit hole. And I just find out more and more and more. And it creates some questions in my mind that need further digging. And I just find newspaper articles. There's a great website called secondhandsongs.com, which
Yep.
lists every single song that a person has written. And so if someone has gone 5 years between Oscar nominations, I can look and say, oh, okay, they were busy in those 5 years. They wrote 10 songs in those 5 years, and they wrote them for these people. And one of them was a #1 hit. So they weren't just sitting on their hands waiting for it. So it informed that these people didn't just do movie songs. They had other lives, or they put on a Broadway show or something like that. So I always want to know that. I don't want to just say, this song was written by Jeff Cummings, and this was his first movie song, and he hit it out of the park, and let's move on. People will want to know who this Jeff Cummings guy is. And I try to do that. I'm not going to take 30 minutes to give somebody's biography, but at least enough to know who they were and help inform as a songwriter. I also found that a lot of performers and some songwriters had biographies written about them, or autobiographies. I was fascinated that Bing Crosby has a 3-volume biography.
Wow.
And I started, obviously I couldn't just sit down and read it. I had to kind of go through and kind of pluck some things out that I needed for the show. But when I'm done with this podcast, I want to go back and read them, because there were some things I learned in there about Bing Crosby that actually informed me about who the person was away from the screen, especially in the war years. And the biographies really helped, because those were people that either talked to family members, coworkers, and things like that, or read letters. They got access to things that I would have never gotten access to. And so it really informed me, because the show is essentially not about the songs, it's about the songwriters. I want to kind of highlight the songwriters and let you understand that somebody like Sammy Cahn, who was nominated for 26 Academy Awards,
Yep.
he was a fantastic person. And I learned a lot about who Sammy Cahn was, and especially in his later life, to try to revive his career. So I'll just tell you, that's where the fuel for my show comes from. It's not just, this is a great song and let's learn about the song. Because I'm not a musical person. I can read music, but I'm not going to go into music theory. I'm not going to talk about how this song jumps from an A to a B minor in this bar, because I don't have access to sheet music, and I don't have that ear for music. But I could say, yeah, listen to this chorus and it's really fantastic, or this lyric is really the essence of the song. And I'll tell you one more thing about the research that I was really lucky to do. I live in Tucson, Arizona, and I was able to drive to Los Angeles and spend about 4 hours in the Academy Museum, which is where they keep all the video archives of all the telecasts. And some of those early ones, which aren't on YouTube, I got to watch. And I didn't have to pay anything, and that was great. And they just said, tell me what years you want, and we'll have them ready for you when you get here. And I just sat at a little cubicle and just put in these DVDs and just sat there and watched. I watched some old performances of some of these songs on the telecast, which was very helpful for me, because I have a book that says who performed on the show, but I want to know how they performed. Did they do it better than the film version or something like that? And that was helpful to me, because I got to be able to write more about that, because in the early years, the 1950s, 1960s, those aren't really available for people to watch, especially the performances, because of licensing issues. So it was really the performances I wanted to see. And I really just loved being able to watch those. I kind of was amazed that they said yes. Not that they had any reason to say no, but it was just amazing. They said, sure, you could sit here and watch you gave us this list of 10 shows you want to watch. Sure. And take as much time as you need.
Yeah, like you said, you go into more details, such as with the Bing Crosby thing, for instance, when you go into the story of the song "True Love," that's in the he was sort of like he backed, even though you mentioned that he never wanted to sing songs that had the word love in,
Yes.
and this was something completely different. So you've got that story there, and then you go into detail about, was it one of the Gershwins or somebody passed away, but even though one of their songs was up for the Oscars, they didn't go that way, even despite the fact that he'd passed away not long before the Oscars.
Yeah, I think that was George Gershwin had passed away, and so his brother was alive to go to the Oscars, and probably thinking that the sentiment vote would go their way, and it didn't. And yeah, it was actually kind of interesting because these days it seems like sentiment goes a long way. But back then, I think I think they probably didn't even care who wrote a song. They just listened to the song and said, "That's a nice song," and well, that's what I'm going to vote for. Is not I'm because especially because on the ballots they don't have the names of the songwriter. So unless you really knew that George Gershwin wrote this particular song, you're not going to vote for it. It would be interesting to know if how many voters really did say I'm going to vote for this song because the Gershwins wrote it and I want to kind of pay tribute to George. But yeah, it's really interesting to know that a lot of songwriters back in those days they didn't live very long back then, and so they wrote songs and a few years later they passed or a few months later they passed away before their nomination, and that was their lasting contribution to films before they left this world.
So well, there you go. Did no. So you've done the research then. How do you then go about recording and editing the show?
So I'll usually let's use an example of where I am now. So we're recording this in the end of March,
Yeah.
and I just finished writing the script for the 2009 year. Okay.
Yep.
I have scripts from 2000 to 2009 written but not recorded. So what I'm going to start doing actually tomorrow is I'm going to go in and record the script for the year 2000 and 2001. I usually do two in a row back to back. Usually take like a 10-minute break or something.
Yep.
And then if I'm feeling it, I'll do another one. So usually 2 to 3 shows at a time, and they take me about, I guess it depends on the length of the script, 45 to 50 minutes to do. Sometimes I screw up and I have to go back and redo it, or redo a sentence or a paragraph. But it usually takes about 45 minutes, and then I'll put it away. I won't just sit down and edit right away. Maybe the next day I'll just go in and then I'll start editing. And I have found that the time it takes to edit a show is about 1.5 times the length of the show.
Yep.
So if it's an hour show, it takes me about an hour and a half to edit because I'll just listen through, make some edits in my own thing, and then I just paste in the song that I need. If it was nominated, I play the full song. If it wasn't nominated, I don't play the full song. I just play like a minute and a half, 2 minutes. And so I have to make sure I get the right edit for those. And then I move along. And very rarely do I go through and listen to it again because it's a long show. And it's not that I trust my edit, but usually I make sure before I move on that I'm okay with the edit that I just made. So I don't have to go back and say, I'm not sure about something. So if I'm stuck on how I'm editing a particular song, I'll stick with it until I'm like, yes, that sounds right. Because I don't want people to listen. That's a weird edit.
Yeah.
I want people to feel like it just flows. Everything flows. And if it doesn't feel like it flows to me, then I'll just stick with it for however long it takes. But usually, like I said, I've got into the rhythm of doing these. I've done so many episodes. I did 111 John Williams episodes, and I've published 67 episodes of Best on Podcast right now. So getting close to 200 episodes. Oh my gosh. And so it kind of feels like I know what I'm doing, but I don't want to feel like I'm just doing it mindlessly because that's when mistakes happen. So I'm always very obvious. I'm very aware of what I'm doing in the moment because sometimes I will feel like I just want to, this song is not very good. I just want to put in a minute. But sometimes the way the song flows, I can't just stop it at a minute. It kind of feels like it just wants to keep going. And I just have so much fun doing that because again, I want to create the best show I can. And if I feel good about it, then I believe the listener will enjoy it and it won't take them out of the experience. So I'll do about 2 or 3 at a time, and then I'll upload them and be done with that, and I just keep going. So I always try to stay, like I said, 10 episodes ahead, and sometimes it's not as easy as that. But if I get to a particular year with this podcast where, let's say, the mid 90s where I know, or the 80s and 90s where I pretty much knew every song and I don't have to go back and watch the movie, then it makes it easier because that's time I don't have to spend watching the movie. But if it's a movie, like I said, if it's a movie I don't know or haven't seen in a long time, I don't just say, oh, I know where this song is in the movie. I actually watch it for context because sometimes that song will be references something that was earlier in the movie. And I don't want to forget that because I want to share that with everybody else, which is why I always say that there's spoilers in my episodes, because I don't want people to think, oh my gosh, you just spoiled this movie for me. I have to tell you what happens because it informs the song. So if you don't want to know what happens, then watch the movie first and then come back to my show.
That reminds me of a clip I saw. One podcast they put on Instagram a clip from their show, and they were talking about The Kid, the Charlie Chaplin film. Yeah. And they were saying about that, and then the co-host said, "Oh, come on, spoilers." And the guy said, "Spoilers for a 108-year-old film."
Yeah, exactly. Some movies, yeah, but I know that there are some people out there who this day and age, or let's say they're older than 25 years old and they probably still haven't seen Titanic all the way through. So I don't want to really spoil it, but come on, it's a real life event. You should know what happened. But yeah, I don't want to spoil the experience for everybody. So I tell them at the start. And so if they hear this movie called, or I'm just throw a movie on The Lion King. Okay.
Yep.
And so I'll just say, hey, just to let you guys know there are spoilers. Or there's another movie that was nominated that year called The Paper, and actually the ending is very crucial to the nominated song, and so I had to say what the ending was to set up the song. So if they want to watch the movie, you know what the ending's, but at least you'll know what's coming up. But I can't avoid that. I'm talking about movies, and when I get to the more current years in the 2020s, if you haven't seen these movies, then, well, what are you doing?
Message to everybody listening: watch films that are black and white, please. They are good films.
Yes, they are. I have a very new appreciation for the Fred and Ginger movies, because I had really only seen maybe 2 of them in my lifetime before doing this podcast. Now I've seen all of them but one, and those 2 were probably the best film pairing in history. Yeah. They had such chemistry from the get-go that all their plots were predictable. I knew what was going to happen 5 minutes into the movie, but I just loved watching them. And yeah, it wasn't even when they started to dance. Just the chemistry of them acting was amazing. And it really saddened me that I knew that they had to go their separate ways to further their careers, but it just saddened me on their last movie, when I watched their last movie together, that it was the last one I was going to see of them, because my heart swelled every time I saw them on screen. And that's a testament to not just them as dancers, but as performers. You don't get that these days, really.
No, you don't. The logo and the music. Using the music from the films, you're okay because you're doing it for educational purposes, I would say. Yeah.
Yes. So I had to consult with a lawyer friend of mine who doesn't deal in copyright law, but he basically told me, not that I say it at the end of every show, that all music clips are permitted under the education clause of the Fair Rights Doctrine in United States law. So just saying it doesn't protect me, but I have that to kind of shield me a little bit, and to say, yes, I'm educating people. This is not just me saying, here is the Oscar-nominated song "Circle of Life" from The Lion King. Here is the Oscar-nominated song "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" from. There is a story behind it. I'm educating people, And so I feel I'm on firm ground with that, and I've been very happy because the show has been out for more than a year.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever talked to me about copyright. So I feel good about that. And the John Williams show too. Nobody ever confronted me about music rights uses. And so, yeah, I needed to do that. I can't have a podcast about music and not play the music. And I didn't want somebody to get an appreciation for a song that won an Academy Award if they could only hear 30 seconds of it, which is probably, I think, would be the limit that you could use without getting a license, or if it's not under fair use. So you can't, okay. One of my favorite Oscar winning songs is I've Had the Time of My Life from Dirty Dancing. You can't
Yeah.
get the essence of that song from just any 30 seconds of it.
No.
So, you got to play the whole song. And so people can really understand it. And whether you've heard it before or not. And I didn't want to be held back by that. And so that's why I consulted with a lawyer to make sure. Now, I could have probably gone online, tried to find a copyright lawyer to get actually expert advice on it. But my lawyer friend was very certain that I was going to be okay. And so far I have been. With the logo, that was also an issue we had with copyright. So I have someone who's a graphic designer, and I asked her to design the logo. And I said the only two things I wanted in the logo were the title of the show and something that looks like an Academy Award.
Yep.
And I said, but the Academy is probably going to run after us really quick if it looks anything like an Oscar. So you can't do anything that looks like an Oscar. And so she went to work, and 2 days later, she showed me the actual logo that you see. And I looked at it and I said, it looks like an Oscar, but it looks far enough away from being an Oscar that you could just say it's just the shape of any award. Like they have
Yep.
these little award tchotchkes that you could get in a shop that look really close to an Oscar too, but nobody has said, hey, you can't sell those because they look too much like an Academy Award. So I think
Yep.
she took that general shape, and it's enough that if you look at it, you think, because it's such an iconic award, you look at it and say, okay, that's an Academy Award. And so it kind of helps inform you what the show is about. It's about, because there's a music note and there's a guy that looks like an Oscar. So it's a show about music and the Academy Awards. So you don't have to really say anything else, because you can't really in a logo.
No.
You have to do everything you can. And I was really fortunate to have her do that, because I couldn't design it myself. There's no way. I don't have an eye for that. And I knew what I wanted, but I just didn't want to try to do it myself because it would look like a third grader.
But like you said, what else do you need? Because like you said, you've got something there that looks a bit like the Oscar. It's called the Best Song Podcast. So you add two and two together, you get that. It's the best song nominations, basically, which
And most people have, I hope they get the idea of that. So if I just showed somebody that logo, I hope they would do that. I never did any kind of like focus testing on it to see if people would understand what it meant. I just assumed they would. And nobody has ever said that logo's confusing to me. So I guess it worked.
it does. Are there any standout moments in the show, or anything that you've come across, for instance? That's a good one, actually, Marv. I'm complimenting myself with this. So, like moments where you've been researching something and you've thought, wow, it's something that jumped out at you and you thought, I never knew that.
Okay, so this is going to be a two-part answer. So the first thing is the song "You Light Up My Life." Okay,
Yep.
it won an Academy Award. It's from a movie that not many people saw, but the song was a big hit. I think it was one of the biggest hits of the 1970s, and I remember the song, and
Yeah.
I was 3 years old when it came out, but I remember hearing it as I grew up and just always heard that song. I was like, yeah, it's a beautiful song. And all I knew about the song was that it was in this movie, and that Debbie Boone had sung it, and that it was a number one hit for a record like 10 weeks.
Wow.
I didn't know anything about the songwriter, and I knew he had directed and wrote the film "You Light Up My Life." And so I did research about the creation of the song. I don't want to spoil it because I want people to listen to the episode from 1977, but I will say this. What I learned about Joseph Brooks, the songwriter,
Yep.
shocked me to my core, and I was stunned. I didn't know anything about it. It's not I can understand why people didn't want to highlight the part of his life that happened after this song, and as well as the creation of the song. There were a lot of shady things that went on that kind of it informs me about the song every time I hear it now. It doesn't take away from the beauty of it, but it just really informs me. And so I think about how I'm going to use the word. It's a very tragic story, and it
Okay.
really I cannot listen to that song anymore for the rest of my life without thinking about what happened during how it was recorded and everything that happened afterward. It shocked me, and I've told people this. I said, you got to listen to the 1977 episode. You will be rocked to your core. So that's one thing. That was the
Yep.
great thing in research. Standout moments. So I've gotten 5 songwriters on my show to talk about writing their songs. That's a standout because
Yeah.
that was kind of like, I'm going to cross my fingers and hope they say yes. And the first one was Keith Carradine. He was the first person to say yes. He wrote "I'm Easy" from Nashville. He, the path that I do is I go to their agents first, unless I have a direct email from them, like they have a website and he's contact me at this email. So with Keith, I went through his agent slash publicist. The same day, his publicist wrote back and said Keith would be very happy to take part in this. So I was shocked that it took less than a day. And
Wow.
he sent me Keith's actual email address. And so I had been in conversation with Keith about setting up a date and time. And the interview itself was wonderful. And then after that, nothing happened for a while. I reached out to a whole bunch of songwriters who said no, or songwriters agents who said no. I don't know if they really weren't available or they just didn't want to do it. Whatever reason, they didn't want to do it. And then I got Dean Pitchford, who wrote the songs for Fame and then
Yeah.
for Footloose. And Dean is a very wonderful person. He's a great songwriter, but he's an even better person. We spent the court, so he was part of 3 episodes, and we recorded each episode separately, each about 2 weeks apart. And it was so wonderful to talk to him. He had such wonderful stories, and he told them so well that I really think I asked a total of from those 3 episodes, those 3 conversations. I think I asked a total of 5 questions because he just loved to talk. And he said there was nothing in there that was extemporaneous. Like I said, oh, I'm going to have to cut this because it's just boring. Everything I kept. Keith Carradine, I did cut a couple of things, but with Dean, I kept all of them. So those episodes were from 1980, 1984, 1989. Just wonderful stuff. The story about him and Kenny Loggins recording Footloose, I love it. It's probably my favorite story of anything I've heard from any of the songwriters. And then after that, I reached out to the 2 songwriters who wrote a song for The Bodyguard for Whitney Houston. And they also said yes very quickly. And they had some wonderful stories to tell. And then on a lark, I just said, I'm just going to try it. I want to reach out to Tim Rice.
Yes.
And it took about a day, but his publicist said Tim would love to do it. And I know that Tim is Tim Rice. You know
Yeah.
who Tim Rice is, being
Yes.
English, you know who he is.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, the thing is we have to cover a lot of songs because he wrote songs for 3 movies. And I'd love to talk to him about all 3, but if he doesn't have the time, just let me know which ones he'd like to talk about. And then I got a response, Tim is available to talk about any project you want to talk about. So basically I had as much time to talk with Tim as I wanted. And it was amazing. Okay.
Wow.
And it was all going to be done at once. Okay. So we were going to talk about Aladdin, we were going to talk about The Lion King, and we were going to talk about Evita. And he had wonderful stories to tell. Not that his memory was bad, but he was talking more in generalities. And I think I really wanted to learn from him mostly about the songwriting process because he's one of the greatest lyricists that ever lived. And
Yeah.
I wanted to learn about his process of writing those songs, coming up with some of the greatest lyrics ever. And so I wasn't looking for any dish on did Madonna hate You Must Love Me. I just wanted to know, how did you and Andrew Lloyd Webber get along writing You Must Love Me? And we talked for an hour and a half, and we could have talked more. I just didn't want to take up too much of his time,
Yeah.
but he looked like he could talk longer. And I was so appreciative of the fact that Sir Tim Rice, took an hour and a half out of his day to talk to me. I could not believe that he wanted to do it. I got so much great information. I think his conversation about writing the songs for The Lion King were
Yeah.
very informative. That's where I really dug into the
Yeah.
songwriting process with him. And I'm not a songwriter. I'm not in the music business, but if I wanted to be a songwriter, I think I would learn a lot from him. And I can't imagine anybody who's not a songwriter wouldn't learn a lot, because you listen to those songs from The Lion King. The three that got nominated were three very different songs from each other, and they all came from Elton John and Tim Rice, and so they had to basically think in three different ways for three different songs, and they all are wonderful. And so getting those were really standouts, and I'm currently working on trying to get more. It is like pushing a rock up a hill. You gotta really just keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. You don't wanna push too much, because I'm not paying them to be on this show, but I think it's a great marketing tool for them, and hopefully I'll get more. But if I don't, Tim Rice was my last interview, and I'd be happy with Tim Rice being my last interview.
I'm trying to think now of who else you could get. Obviously, I Will Always Love You by Whitney Houston wouldn't have ended up in being nominated because it wasn't
Nope.
original,
Correct.
but it wasn't put forward for Best Little Whorehouse, was it? Even though that wasn't.
It was not, because it was not written for Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. Dolly Parton
Oh,
wrote that in 1976 when she
okay.
was leaving her variety show. Porter Wagner, I believe, was her agent or publicist or
Yeah.
something. And she wrote it as a tribute to him in 1976. And then when the movie version of Best Little Whorehouse in Texas came out, she decided to use that song because it wasn't in the stage show. And so she used that song as a goodbye, farewell to Burt Reynolds. And it became a modest hit. And then, of course, Whitney Houston took it. And that was so, yeah, I remember in 92, I knew it wasn't an original song.
Yeah.
And of course, can you imagine what Twitter would have been like if Twitter existed in 1992? Or been like, how can you not nominate I Will Always Love You? It's the best song ever. And then people were like, listen, it's not original. So yeah, I do talk about I Will Always Love You, but yeah, Judge Friedman and Alan Rich wrote Run to You from The Bodyguard. And they talked about it being the opportunity of a lifetime to write for Whitney Houston. And they had some good stories to tell about that song. Almost didn't get into the movie because Clive Davis, who was the CEO of Arista Records, where Whitney Houston was, kind of liked the song, didn't like the song, wanted it changed, was going to use another song, and then kind of came back to it. And luckily it did. But yeah, I feel really grateful that all these songwriters said yes, because they didn't have to. And I think the ones that have said yes, I think what worked in my favor is they are retired from the business. And so they're not currently working. I think the ones I've been reaching out to lately are currently working, and whether or not they really are so busy they don't have time for an hour chat with me that's debatable. And I'm not going to sit here and whine about it, but I would love to have more. And I do have kind of those Moby Dicks, that white whale of songwriters. I really hoped to get Alan Menken. And I think that's why I reached out to Tim Rice, because I was like, oh, if I can't get Alan Menken, maybe Tim Rice will talk about Aladdin. And then I'm like, Tim worked on another Disney movie, and then he could do another one. So, but Alan would have been great. Maybe I'll try again. Randy Newman, I think they were thinking he might do some, and then not the last minute, but they kind of came back to me and said, no, he's not available. But I did leave it open and said if he does become available before this summer, there's always an opportunity for him to be on the show. So fingers crossed. Keep your fingers crossed for me, Marv. I hope they come through.
I am, and I've got it in my head now. I'm just going to look now and think: is this person? Did they write a song that was nominated? And could you get them? Could you get Phil Collins?
I did. I didn't even try Phil Collins because I was thinking I'd have to ask him about South Park, and I think he probably knows that. and I think he probably doesn't want to talk about being ridiculed in South Park.
Yes.
So I just kind of just I didn't even try with Phil Collins. He would be great to talk about. He would have been great. I think I would have loved to talk to him. I'm sure he would have been fascinating, but I guess I didn't reach out to him because I didn't want to ask him about South Park. I would have felt nervous about his response. And he probably would have been, all these years later, he probably has a good attitude about it. But yeah, I just left Phil Collins alone. Maybe that's the man that got away.
He's got a sense of humor. Yeah, that Genesis
Yeah, I've
video
seen
with the
interviews with him. He
puppets.
does have a good sense of humor. I guess it was just the nerves in me because I just didn't, I didn't know how it would come off if I said, "So you got made fun of in South Park. How did that feel?"
Mm.
But be that as it may, it's all right.
So, what would you say would be your 5 favorite film songs?
So I actually have, it's a very easy list for me because I've always ranked them, and I actually had some listeners reach out to me and ask me what they are so far. And I'll tell you, and I'm actually going to mention it in my final episode as well, because I know people are going to be asking. So they're all from the 80s and 90s, unfortunately, or fortunately, but that's just my formative years. And maybe that's why. So they're actually ranked from fifth to first. Circle of Life from The Lion King, Flashdance, What a Feeling, Take My Breath Away,
Yep.
I've Had the Time of My Life, and Friend Like Me from Aladdin. It's my favorite song ever.
Yep.
I could listen to those again. Those are desert island songs. If those are the only 5 songs I could listen to the rest of my life, I would never get tired of them.
And out of interest, while you were speaking about it, I've written down on my notes here to listen to the Dean Pitchford episodes.
You would absolutely love them. I just cannot stress how great of a storyteller he is. And again, once you listen to the songs that he wrote, when you talk about writing Fame and the songs from Footloose and After All for the Robert Downey Jr. movie, chances are you're gonna have a very new perspective on those songs. Not a negative one, not You Light Up My Life, but it just a different perspective that's just gonna make you kind of like, especially when, like I said, the song, the story about him and Kenny Loggins recording Footloose. You will not hear the bridge of that song the same way again. I hope I sold that enough. I've told everybody that. I said, you got to listen to this story of how Kenny Loggins and Dean Pitchford recorded Footloose. It's amazing.
I want to hear about the music from Fame as well, because I think Fame has got incredible songs and scoring.
It does. Yeah.
So, do we really need to go into this bit here? The importance of music in film.
I think we've already stressed it. It makes you feel more about it. It makes you feel the emotions you're already feeling. It kind of heightens them. And let's say a good movie song, it basically, I've said this in a few episodes, especially in the musicals. If you're trying to say something and just saying it doesn't work, you have to sing it. And some of the best movie songs, like we talked about Over the Rainbow, Judy Garland wants to talk about what she wants. And she starts to talk about it, and then there's just no other way to talk about it. So she sings it. And Friend Like Me, we meet the genie, and yes, he's funny for a while, and then he has to sing about why he's going to be important to Aladdin. Time of my life. I've had the time of my life. It comes at the perfect time. I've had the time of my life. It's at the end of the movie. Johnny and Baby have had this amazing summer, and Bill Medley and Jennifer Warnes are singing about that. You can't do wrong with a great movie song. It just, they've understated that this is going to be a memorable summer for them in Dirty Dancing, but the song just really just highlights it even more. And then you just walk out of the movie theater and you're like, gosh, I love that song and I want to keep hearing it. And then now every time I hear it, I think about the dance at the end of the movie. And there's nothing there have been some bad songs. There have been some songs that are like, gosh, this song is terrible. Why did they put this song in? That's a needle drop song. We call them needle drop songs. They just director was like, I want to put this song in this movie because I need to fill. They probably are like, this scene isn't doing it for me. I need to put a song in to help it. And then you feel that you notice the song is there, but you're like, why is this song here?
Yeah.
And most of the time, when you get a song that was written specifically for the movie, like for a particular scene, it really helps. And if you can't imagine that song not being in that scene because otherwise the scene kind of falls apart. So I praise the songwriters who really can make those songs not just memorable outside of the movie, but make the movie even better.
Yeah. I mean, they're not very popular at the moment. People are trying to put them down, but like the Marvel films, for instance, where you've got the character of in the Guardians of the Galaxy films, even though they're using pre-existing songs in these films, I think James Gunn's chosen very well the songs because they reflect very much that character that Chris Pratt is playing in those songs. Those songs are that character essentially.
Yes, and it also helps that I think he's taken up by in the spaceship in the 1980s.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that he's only listening to songs from the 1980s. That's all he knows. But those songs have meaning because I think his father made that,
Mother
or
died.
his mother made the
Yeah.
mixtape or something like that. His mother made the mixtape, I think, and so it helps him remember his mom. So yes, those songs have meaning. It's not just, oh, let's put in some cool 80s songs for nostalgia for the adults. But yeah, when you hear him listening to it, and you see it in when sometimes he's dancing to them, sometimes he gets a little bit emotional. So there's meaning to them. And yeah, even the needle drop songs do have their purpose. The songs from Singing in the Rain, those are all songs that came from different places, but come together, they really help make a really good movie.
Yep. And something like Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now by Starship, that perfectly fits with when it is in the song Mannequin as well, and that relationship that's there.
Yeah, I believe that. And again, you could just have the film composer write a piece of music for it.
Yep.
And yeah, that might work, but since there's no dialogue in that scene, you need a song to kind of help these singers say what's going on. Nothing's going to stop them now. They're not held back by this curse, and it really helps them, and they're married and they're just going to live this great life. Unfortunately, I wish people had the filmmakers had realized you need to stop and not make Mannequin 2.
Wow, how many times could we say that for films where they've said
Yes,
where they've made sequels and they shouldn't have?
money grabs.
Yes. So, what advice would you give to people starting their own podcast?
This is my second one,
Yeah.
and all I have to I know there are a lot of people I read advice from a lot of people, and they just say, just don't give up, keep going. If you feel like you're getting tired of it, an open-ended show that doesn't have an end, I could see that because you're just like, oh, this is a grind, and oh my gosh, I got to do another one. I got to do another one. But I guess because mine are close-ended, I know when they're ending. That gives me motivation. I'm like, I'm only going to be doing this for 2 years, and so I don't have to feel like this is going to be this has already been 5 years of my life, and I got 5 more years of this. What am I going to do with it? I got to keep it fresh. So if I can't speak to those who have these open-ended shows, but I know there are a few closed-ended shows. I guess they're limited series podcasts. Don't get rushed to the end. Don't get just each episode is its unique episode.
Yeah.
But the big thing is just don't get carried up in the audience numbers. I try not to. Even though maybe after, let's see, episode comes out on Monday, usually sometimes I'll check on a Wednesday and be like, how many people have listened to this show in 48 hours? And sometimes I'm like, wow, that's a lot. And sometimes I'm like, this episode doesn't seem to be going over very well. I try not to get hung up on it because I can affect the number of people who I can promote as much as I can,
Yeah.
but I can only control the content of the show really. And so I just make the best content you can, and people will find it. The John Williams podcast, people are still listening to it and writing to me. That show ended 3 years ago. I did one for the last Indiana Jones movie. I did a special episode, but the show kind of ended 3 years ago, and people are still finding it. They're still listening to it and still reaching out to me and say, "I just found this show and good job," and all that. So if it's good, people will find it. And I know that this is going to be a resource. And I want it to be a resource for somebody 10 years later who said, I was doing a book report or
Yep.
on Bing Crosby, and I found your podcast and I got to learn more about him. And or people they just want to know more about movie music. They're just a fan of movie songs, and or my favorite song is White Christmas. And I never knew that it had this history. I never knew it won an Academy Award. And so they can learn more about that. I don't care if it's 1 month after it was released, 1 year after it was released, 10 years after release. I hope people find it, and they will. And I just keep doing the work. And that would be my advice. Just do the work, do the best show you can, and people will find it. And you have to be happy with it. If you're not happy with an episode, you're in control of it. Take the time to make it better. That's about it.
Hell, even I'm going to start listening to the John Williams podcast now that I know it's there. And when I do listen to it, I'm going to tag Steven Spielberg and let him know that, and say to him, Steven, have you listened to this cool podcast?
I actually did reach out to Spielberg because when I did reach out to John Williams and asked if he would be a part of the show, and his agents summarily said that they said he does not do podcast interviews.
Yeah.
So they were specifically no to you. And I was okay with that. I didn't expect him to say yes. So I actually did reach out to Spielberg to try to get him on the show to talk about his relationship with John for my last episode, which was just going to be a summary of his life. And at the time, Spielberg was just starting to work on The Fabelmans. And so I knew it would be but what's the saying? You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I just decided to reach out, and they told me Spielberg is busy working on his new film. Thank you for reaching out, but he is not available at this time. So his people know that there's this show about him, about John Williams. So I don't know if he's listened. I hope he's maybe taken the time to listen to a couple of them, because I do mention Spielberg a lot, especially the Spielberg films, because that is a special relationship. It's one that I think it's the longest lasting. It is the longest lasting director-composer relationship. I think just a couple years ago they surpassed Blake Edwards and Henry Mancini. So and it's obviously one of probably the most productive and most successful collaborations that there is out there.
Yeah, I've always thought with that relationship there, we were starting to wind down there, but I'm going down here now. So I think about those sort of relationships. You mentioned the Mancini and the Blake Edwards as well, and I also think of things like the Alfred Hitchcock and the Bernard Herrmann.
Yeah, they did very good stuff too, but I think there was a falling out in the late 60s. I think what it was, it actually happened right about the time of The Man Who Knew Too Much, because Alfred Hitchcock did want a song, and Bernard Herrmann said, absolutely not. I do not write songs.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the beginning of the end for them. And I think Alfred Hitchcock wanted a song in a couple of his other movies, and Herrmann was like, no. And it just it was kind of sad, because I think Hitchcock's career could have continued to be great with Herrmann's music, because I think when Herrmann didn't write music for Hitchcock films, Hitchcock films actually started to kind of go down in quality a little bit. But that's not to say that it completely went down quality, because John Williams wrote the score for Family Plot for Hitchcock. So that was actually a good score. And so it's not just, but I think John Williams did it because he was good friends with Bernard Herrmann. So he maybe did it as a favor or not. I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember. But yeah, that was a great collaboration. Tim Burton and Danny Elfman, that's another one.
Yeah.
There have been a lot of them out there that have been very fruitful, but obviously no one will ever match Steven Spielberg and John Williams. Even if they had stopped after, let's say, even if they had stopped after Close Encounters, that's still Jaws and Close Encounters and The Reavers and Sugarland Express. Those are still 4 very good movies. And nobody would have said, oh, that then if Spielberg had said, I want E.T. and somebody else wrote it, who could do the music? You can't imagine E.T. without John Williams' music. You probably can't imagine the Indiana Jones music, but written by anybody else. So we don't want to.
You can't imagine it without the, is it called the Raiders March? Is that the theme?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
You can't imagine any Indiana Jones film without that.
You don't want to. I
No.
think I've tried to think about it a couple times. How can you? It's kind of going in. I'm sure every composer, I would have done that differently. And
Yep.
maybe that would be a nice test for a composer to say, here's a score that I wrote for Raiders of the Lost Ark. Let's put it into the film and see if it improves it. That would be a nice little, that probably would be a nice test for somebody to do. But I think people would probably automatically say no, it doesn't work because you can't get that other music out of your head.
No. I mean, that we're going off song slightly and going more into score here, but when you were saying about at the beginning about that experience with Jurassic Park, there's a thing there where you were saying that you're right. And I'm going to reference some other pieces as well. So you've got that there where there's a scope to it where as the picture comes out and you see more, the score gets bigger as well, and it changes accordingly to what's going on around, and it adds to the whole thing. And that reminds me of when in Lawrence of Arabia, you get suddenly that big shot of the vista, and you've got that amazing score that's going on there as well. And so that reminds me, the score that happens in Jurassic Park reminds me of the big score in Lawrence of Arabia and all these other films where the score works to push the emotion and add, not sort of like try and force the listener to think this way. It just adds to the whole aesthetic of what's going on.
Yeah, because like me, I had gone to Jurassic Park ready to see the dinosaurs. And that music was like, okay, here's what you've been waiting for. And so it just heralds that we're finally here and the dinosaurs are coming. So I think that's why I was like, oh God, good, we're finally going to the island. And then this music, it just matched my emotion at the time. And I think that's what John likes to do. He doesn't try to change your mind about something. He's not, let's see. So he's not trying to say that, okay, I know that this scene is funny, I want to make it dramatic. And so he's going to write dramatic music, and then you're not going to feel happy about it. He's adding to what's there. And so the scene actually is that scene in Jurassic Park where they're trying to get the seatbelts on and they're having this little chaos in the helicopter. The music during those shots is a little comedic, but then when it goes outside of the helicopter, it's very dramatic and grand and anthemic, and you just I feel it. I could hear it in my head and I get chills. And I got emotions then. I'll just tell you a story really quick because I love telling it. So 15 years later, they put Jurassic Park in the theaters again. And I was like, oh, I don't need to see it. I've seen this before. I saw it in the theater. What difference is it going to be? And then I was like, okay, I'll go see it. And I think it was like a Saturday night, and I was sitting there, and there weren't many people in the theater. And I just remember all I wanted to do was just hear the music coming out of these speakers again. And it gets to that moment right before the moment, and I started to get these knots in my stomach because I'm excited about that moment. And then the helicopter pans over and you see the island. I start bursting into tears. I don't know where it came from. I just started crying like uncontrollably. And I was like, what am I doing? I can't stop crying with this music. And I thought about it later, and I was like, my brain remembered that moment in 1993 that turned a corner in my life.
Yeah.
And that music that turned a corner to me now being a big fan of John Williams. And without Jurassic Park, would I be a fan of John Williams? Maybe eventually. But that was the moment. And my brain was just overwhelmed with emotion. And every time I watch that movie, it comes on TV, I'm like, I don't know if I could watch that scene again. And I don't start crying uncontrollably, but I get very emotional because it reminds me of that moment. So that's why it's still a very crucial moment to me in my movie watching life and my music life, everything. And I've written to John Williams to thank him for that, and he did respond, believe it or not, with a little autographed card, and so that is one of my prized possessions. So Jurassic Park will always be a great moment for me, and I'll never forget it. I don't listen to any podcasts now because I don't want them to inform my own work. I don't want
Yep.
to get influenced by them. But when I'm done, I do have a list. And at the top of that list, I do want to go back to Cinematic Sound Radio because Eric Woods does a lot of great work. But there's a new one that I found when I was looking to make sure that nobody was doing a podcast that I was doing. It's a podcast called Categorically O. So they take a different Oscar category and they talk about it from a particular year. And so it may be best adapted screenplay from 1960. So they'll take a whole episode and talk about that category and they'll talk about the nominees and they do pretty good with it. And so I didn't want to listen to that show and think, "Oh, that's a good idea. I want to put that in my show," because I don't want people to think, "Oh, Jeff just copied them," or maybe they copied Jeff. I want to still do my own thing. So I've only listened to a couple of their shows just to make sure we weren't doing the same thing, and we're not. So that show is two people. I think it's unscripted. They're just talking to each other about these nominees in each category, and mine is very scripted. I don't go off book for anything. I thought about it for a couple of 2 seconds, and I was like, "There's no way I'd be rambling for 2 hours," especially with all the information that I have. I don't wanna just have a list of things and say, "I wanna talk about this, I wanna talk about this, I wanna really be informed." I don't wanna be like, "Oh, wait a minute, did I say that this was his 6th nomination or his 5th? And I didn't write that down, and, oh, I gotta wait, I gotta go find out." So I wanna have it all there, and the script helps me stay in line, and again, Categorically O is a great show. They really do a lot of great stuff. I'm glad they go through different categories. I did reach out to them and say, "If you ever wanna do one about any original song categories, I'd be happy to be a guest on the show." But most of the shows, like I said, I've really become a fan of shows that are basically people talking like we're doing here.
Yep.
It has to be interesting, though. Something that is compelling to me, but also they're making it compelling. Because when I found that the unscripted shows that I thought I would like, I don't like because they just ramble and ramble and ramble, and I don't think they have a kind of a direction. And so it's just 2 guys talking, and I don't think they even know where they're going with it. And so I'm listening to it, I'm like, "Get to the point, get to the point." And so that kinda turns me off. But there have been some good shows where I think they're kind of scripted and unscripted, and I like those. I think they've done a good job. They're not about movies, they're not about music, sometimes it's about sports. I've just listened to little bits of things here and there, not to get ideas, but just kinda be like, "Am I on the right track? Am I doing something right? Am I doing something wrong?" And I'll hear a podcast and I'll just be like, "Oh, okay, I'm doing it." They're kinda doing the same thing. Or I'll be like, "Okay, that's interesting. I'm doing the exact opposite." And I'm not saying they're a more popular podcast, so they must be doing it right and I must be doing it wrong. It's more, okay, maybe let me think about what they're doing and will it apply to me? Can I do it? Because I'm a one-man show. And so a lot of the things I do, I can't just hand off to somebody else. I can't say, "Hey, can you go research this thing about this songwriter while I finish this editing this episode that I have to finish?" I have to do it all myself. And I love doing it all myself. And it's not that I'm a perfectionist and I'm one of those people who has to do everything themselves. I have some guests on my John Williams podcast, and they were really good. They were very, very good. The only problem was that I had to work on their schedule. They'd have to watch the movie, they'd have to think about the score, we'd have to talk about some of the music cues we're gonna talk about. And usually I'd say, "Okay, can we get this done and can you get this all ready in 48 hours?" And sometimes it'd take a whole week. And I'm like, "I've been ready to record the show for 3 days. What are you doing?" And so I'm sitting here just antsy. I'm like, I could have had this show done. And so I don't get frustrated, but that's basically another episode that I haven't done because I'm sitting there waiting for them. So this one I knew other than getting the interviews, I wasn't going to have any guest hosts just because that's a lot of work. They'd have to watch every movie and
Yep.
I know how long that takes. And like me, they have a full-time job. They may only get to 1 movie per week and that takes them almost a month to get that show around to where they want. So so to come back around to your question, I want to listen to a whole bunch more. I have become a fan of podcasts now. I don't want to start having a list of 10 because I don't want to get caught up in forgetting others. So
Yeah.
I may just pick 3 and just stick with those. And then if they're most of them are open ended and they don't do every week, so I can kind of catch up on some, and then maybe 3 weeks later they come out with another one, and while I'm waiting for that next one, I can go back to the others. That's kind of one of the reasons why I don't want to get involved in podcasts. It's like watching TV shows. I get too much, and I start watching too many of them, and I get too invested in some of them, and then it gets too much, and then I have to let one go, and I don't want to let him go.
Okay, thanks for speaking with me today, Jeff.
Such fun. I've really appreciated the conversation.
Me too. So where can people find you and get hold of you?
The show is hosted on Podbean, and then it's everywhere else. Any other podcast server, it's there. And I think my listeners mostly are on Podbean or on Apple Podcasts, but they've come from all over the world too, which is great. And so, yeah, you just do a search on the Best Song Podcast, and hopefully mine comes up first, and you'll be able to listen to all 67 episodes so far. And I do recommend listening to them in order, but you don't have to if you don't want to. Most people have been waiting for the era when they were alive, but I've told them that the songs from the 80s are informed by the songs from the 60s, so you might want to listen to those. So listen to them in order if you can. They'll still be here. You don't have to rush through them. I'm not going. The show won't go anywhere even when it's done.
Absolutely. You can find Pods Like Us on or you can contact us through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, which is now called X, TikTok, and Threads. We also have a Patreon page, so just look for Pods Like Us on there, and you can contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you everyone for listening, and I hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.